folk of Alexander, and some of Hercules, of Hector and Lysander, and such great names as these. But of all
right, I've got my coffee. I've got a decent night of sleep. Hello and welcome to this Battle Mech overview. Today we're going to be looking at the Battlemaster, and that's going to be another one that's going to be a bit long because the Battlemaster has a fairly long history of service. Not as long as like the Thunderbolt that we've already talked about, but it's still a very decent one, and it's one that keeps coming up whenever you start looking at historical records. Even though it's not the biggest one around, it was one that was heavily used by just about everybody. We might even get a chance to talk a little bit about two of the famous pilots of the machine, two rulers of nations, Hanse Davion and Theodore Kurita. So let's get into it. As usual, let's go over a bit of history and setup before we go in. Command mechs are a fact of life nowadays. The Lorix Order, which was a weird semi-cult, basically, that wanted modern mechwarriors to be modern-day knights in service of their lord, codified a lot of what we know and what we do as mechwarriors in the end. Most of the commanders wanting to lead from the front, rather than sitting in a cushy HQ, pushing paper dolls around and telling people what to do. This has led to a variety of mechs to be used as command mechs, and a few of them to actually be built around that concept from the get-go. Requirements for command mechs are fairly wide. There isn't really a true codified thing, but normally you will have decent firepower, very good computing power to be able to manage either a lance or all the way to a battalion, and a decent amount of armor to protect you, since you are one of the more sensitive pilot out there. Very good example of those would be the Marauder, which was the Star League's command mech by default, and the one that they used for their special forces as well, along with its successor, the Night Star. Both of those are used extensively nowadays as well, both as command mech and attack mech, but the Night Star has been the command mech by excellence for the Federated Suns in recent history. Another thing that you should know is that during the Star League era, which was the era most common battle mechs, let's say, have been developed, there was basically two tiers of battle mechs. You had the Star League Royal Regiments and Friends, including the House Regiments at the top of the food chain, let's say in the Draconis Combine and such, where they usually got the good stuff. Ferrofibrous armor, Endo Steel, XL engines, ER lasers, you know the drill. The stuff that was rediscovered around the middle of the 31st century was being used for those mechs extensively. For everybody else, you add less advanced variants most of the time. Most of those were built with off-the-shelf equipment, stuff that was common since the Age of War and the Reunification War, and those machines were significantly cheaper and easier to maintain. The fact that they used basic equipment also meant that they're the ones that survived the succession wars the best. Local militaries, mercenaries, corporate security forces wanted command mechs, and they needed to get something functional to do it, which led to mechs like the Cyclops being introduced, and, of course, the mech of the day, which is the Battlemaster. The Battlemaster is one of the easiest mech to recognize nowadays, and probably for most of its existence, just because it has somewhat of an iconic look. It's big, it's bulky, it has that big gun in its hand, it does look like an actual soldier in a way, and people really gravitate toward it. It's actually the first model kit that I ever got, and the first model for gaming that I've ever gotten as well. So it does show that it has some lasting power. Aulis Industries introduced the Battlemaster in 2633, but they were actually pretty smart with it because they decided to go with two different models. A fairly bare bones one, the 1G, which is the one that most people know, and a fancy one with bells and whistles, which was the 1C. Which was meant to be sold to Star League and command regiments in various nation states. At 85 tons, the Battlemaster is still pretty big, but it's not the biggest in the assault category, but it does allow him to have a top speed of about 65 kilometers per hour using a Vox 340 engine. The internal bits were pretty much all standard on both of those models, the 1C and the 1G. The armor was standard as well, 14.5 tons of it, which is very, very decent, and that makes the whole thing actually fairly easy to fix and maintain. The Battlemaster, in its standard setup and equipment, is meant to be a brawler, which might sound a little bit weird if you're thinking about a command mech, but if you're leading from the front, it kind of makes sense. Your base equipment on both the 1G and the 1C, more or less, is a Donald PPC in that gun pod on the arm, which can be discarded if required. Most people never do it, but it is possible. 6 Martel medium lasers, 4 pointing forward and 2 pointing backward to protect you if some bug gets in your back, which are split on the right and left torso. Ollie 6 tube of SRM on the shoulder with 2 tons of ammo. Some people will tell you that's a little bit of overkill. Some commanders are known to strip one of those ton of ammo for more heat sink or more armor. And against infantry, you get a pair of machine guns on the arm, very basic Sperry Browning ones, which will be making short work of any unarmored targets. You get 18 heat sinks. It's not a whole lot, but if you're not crazy with what you're shooting, you're actually going to be kept fairly cool. And one of the real problems with it, I would say, is that the canopy is made of all-thermoglass, which is a little bit fragile, but was required so that the commander could have a very nice view of the entire battlefield at all times. The SLDF got a few different versions of the Battlemasters to play with, but the 1C was the first off on the showroom floor, and the one that people kind of remember. It's really weird because a lot of those 1Cs were brought out of service and upgraded and downgraded along the way. There's a few of these 1Cs that are actually running around in 1G configurations after being refit and repaired and redone by just about everybody. What we actually know of the 1C is that either the rear lasers or the machine gun were taken out along with an heat sink to make room for a command console. That's the important bit that differentiates it from the 1G. Another thing that it has is double heat sinks, so getting one of those heat sinks taken out is not as bad. There are very, very few actual 1Cs still running around. You might find one in a cache somewhere if you're lucky, but the common SLDF versions were the 1GB and the 1GC, which were completely different beasts with an Endo Steel chassis, double heat sinks, no rear firing medium lasers, but a pair of ERPPCs and a large pulse laser, so you get a lot more firepower. The 1GBC had some of its heat sinks taken out, which I don't think is a very good idea if you've got 2 ERPPC and a large pulse laser, but it has that command console put in. Now for the question a lot of Mechwarriors end up having: what's the difference between a command console and a dual cockpit? Dual cockpits are generally lighter. It's basically an extra seat set up in the end of the battle mech, and that is usually used in trainer machines or to have a second pilot take care of the shooting while the first one take care of the piloting. Very common in things like Clan Ellsworth's Quad Vs. You add that in some LAM as well. You add that in a few different trainer mechs like the Chameleon and even some Wasps and Stinger. And I have to say, trainer Stingers are terrible. I will to sit in. That's what a dual cockpit ends up being most of the time. Command consoles, on the other hand, do have a whole set of controls so they can pilot the battle mech if required, but they are really meant for command and control. It'll show you your entire unit. It'll show you even more than that if you start to flipping some switches around. You can use it to spot for missiles. You can get tactical orders out. You can get communications to your dropship and even to a jump ship that's in orbit. Well, warships that would be in orbit if required. So the command console is a lot more powerful than just being a second seat for someone to backseat drive your battle mech. I rarely do this, but here we're actually going to talk a little bit about some of the famous pilots of the Battlemaster. Well, at least 2 men who piloted a similar machine at about the same time in similar roles. First Prince Hanse Davion was not always the first prince, and he was piloting a Battlemaster 1G called Dana after his first true love for most of his service in the FFS, as a second prince, let's say, and he served with a distinction while in it. After his brother died, Hanse Davion had to return to New Avalon and take up the role of leadership of a nation, but he kept Dana around, and he actually had to use it to defend Nice against Comstar forces during the Fourth Succession War, a thing that we've learned of once we had some access to Comstar databases. On the other side of things, you had Kanrei no Gunji Theodore Kurita, who was piloting a BLR-1C. Originally, he wasn't a BLR-1G, but Comstar made a bit of a boo-boo when they shipped new equipment to the Draconis Combine during the War of 39. Another thing we've learned of through Comstar's archives. Theodore's Battlemaster was actually at that point a BLR-1C that was taken off that shipment, which had a bunch of battle mechs that were to Star League standards rather than Succession War standard, basically. That particular battle mech was actually piloted by Fujito Tetsuhara. Theodore Kurita was basically sitting in the command console, managing entire assaults and entire defenses of planets. For Bodyguards of Theodor, a few other mechs were actually refit to a standard card BLR-1GS or the Otomo configuration, basically having the same kind of paint scheme, not the same equipment, but close enough that people could be confused if you saw multiple copies of it on the battlefield. There were a few Succession War variant of the Battlemaster. The first one was really Davion's version, which they couldn't build. So what they did was try to make the ones that they had as durable as possible. What they did was take out the SRM-6 and the rear-firing medium lasers to add 6 more heat sinks and a ton of armor. Not what I would have done, but it's not a bad setup to begin with. These 1D models became fairly common around 2867 and onward. Red Devil Industries was a company in the Lyran Commonwealth who built Battlemasters, but they decided to make their own config with the 1S, taking out the PPC and the SRM-6 and replacing it with a 15 rack of LRM, a 5 rack of LRM, and a pair of 2 tubes SRM, and a little bit more heat sinks. I'll be honest, I haven't seen a whole lot of those walking around, and I'm not sure they're super efficient. It's one of those things that I've never really seen, to be honest. As the Wheel of Time turned and Star League technology was rediscovered through a variety of means, new versions of the Battlemaster came out, mostly right around the clan invasion. The BLR-3M was the most common version to come out in this period, with the Donald PPC replaced by a Fusigon Longtooth ER PPC, and one of the machine guns taken out to put case to protect the ammo. Heat sinks are also replaced with double heat sinks. The pretty simple refit of the machine increases its survivability by a fair amount. Same with its range with that ERPPC, but I'm never a huge fan of Inner Sphere ERPPCs. They generate a lot of heat for the same damage you get out of a regular PPC. The only real advantage is that you don't have that minimum range most PPCs are known to have. Red Devil, at the same time, they had just built a new production line for that 1S. Well, they decided to go with the 3S model. They kept the standard heat sinks and the original SRM-6, but they took out that PPC and put a 20 rack of LRM in. Medium lasers are replaced as well for more accurate and more damaging medium pulse lasers, which trade in range as well. Inner Sphere medium pulse lasers have a fairly short range. I'm never a huge fan of those either, but I understand why you would use them, especially with how accurate they are compared to regular lasers. We could go on and on talking about different variants and different setups of the Battlemaster, but we're going to keep ourselves to the more fancy or more popular ones. The BLR-4S came out in 3062 and was a departure from the energy weapon heavy loadout of the standard Battlemaster. It used a light 340 Vox engine and 13 double heat sinks. Light engines had just come out there, and except for Aussteiner, nobody really had access to them at the time. For weapons, it uses a Zeus slingshot Gauss rifle with 3 tons of ammo, along with 4 Ramtech 1500Z ER medium lasers and 2 good old Defiance B3Ms in the back. The 6 tube of SRM is also equipped with an Artemis 4 fire control system, and for anti-infantry measures, you're actually equipped with small pulse lasers instead of machine guns. That's a common refit that we do here at FRR. Whenever you've got a pair of machine guns and a ton of ammo, a pair of small pulse lasers will do the same job, and you've got less chances of blowing up. The Free World League built a kind of weird design right before the Jihad, around 3067, with the 5 series, the 5M. It has a light Gauss rifle and an ER large laser in the arm, giving it mediocre long-range firepower. To back this up, you've got 6 ER medium lasers, 4 in the front, 2 in the back. I honestly don't like that model very well. Like I said, it has mediocre long-range firepower, with that light Gauss rifle and ER large laser dealing maybe a ton's worth of our damage on a mech if you're lucky and boat it. It also generates tons of heat with all that ER laser equipment. It's not the most horrible thing out there, but definitely not one I would be hunting for. The 6 series was actually where things got really crazy, and while the 6G is good, the rest are rather special. Your 6G uses a light engine and 15.5 tons of armor. You sacrifice a little bit of survivability with that light engine, but not much. You get an EV PPC, 2 light PPCs, and a Streak 6 tube of SRM. For rear firing, you've got ER small lasers and small X-pulse lasers for anti-infantry work. That makes the 6G a half-decent sniper, and you can use it for other work if required. Now, the 6C mounts 4 light AC5 along with the 6 tube of Streak SRM and small X-pulse lasers. You get 4 tons of ammo, so you can use all sorts of specialty rounds for those AC5s, but that makes the Battlemaster not a Battlemaster, in my opinion. The 6R actually uses a clan-grade rotary AC5, where you get a little bit more range than the Inner Sphere one. Light PPCs in the torsos and the Streak 6, and your rear is actually protected by improved heavy medium lasers, because reasons. Finally, the 6X is the one that uses the biggest engine that I know of on a regular battle mech, with a 425 XXL engine, because why not, with an Endo Steel skeleton. For weapons, you get an ER PPC, an heavy PPC, 2 ER medium laser, and a Streak 6. At this point, why not? Then you add the 10 series with the 10S, which is completely weird as well. This one uses a compact 255 engine to go about 55 kilometers per hour, so it's slower, but you also have an heavy-duty gyro to make sure that it doesn't break. For weapons, you get a Defiance 1001 ER PPC, 6 Diverse Optic ER medium lasers, a Diverse Optic ER small laser, and a Streak tube of SRM, with 4 tubes. It sounds a little bit weird. It's the same setup as a basic Battlemaster, but just odd by being slower and maybe a little bit more reliable. You also get a Guardian ECM, which is pretty useful to break up C3 networks and all that advanced electronic warfare equipment that's out there, and an actual pair of B-pods to blow when some battle armors try to swarm you. Not a bad design, just one that I'm not comfortable with for some reason. House Kurita had quite a few Battlemaster, and they made a few different versions actually to accommodate their C3 computer technology. The first one was the CM, which uses a smaller engine, that 255, to have enough room to put a pair of C3 computers in. That makes it rather a primary target whenever people know it's there, so you have to be very careful with it. For its defense, it's got an ER PPC, 2 ER medium laser, and a Shigunja MRM-30 rack, and 16 tons of armor. That makes it a little bit tougher than your average Battlemaster, and it's capable of defending itself if something gets into range. The K3 version actually mounts a single C3 master. I think it's a little bit more sensible, and it's made to engage at range with an ER PPC, 2 ER large laser, 4 ER medium laser, and a Streak 6 tube SRM. I actually really like the K3 model. As with most things, the Battlemaster has a few different versions that uses clan equipment. The most recent one would be the one that Clan Seafox is building on Twycross, which they dubbed the C3. There's a C1, there's a C2, obviously, but we're not going to talk about them here. It is fairly close to the original 3M version, using clan technology with 4 ER medium lasers from the Series B, a Streak SRM6, and a Type DDS Kingston ERPPC, all to clan standard. You get about 33% more punch on those ER medium lasers and 50% more punch on that ERPPC. That makes a big difference. For anti-infantry work, you still get Series 5 machine guns, which are basically Sperry Brownings with the serial numbers filed off. To make sure that all that firepower actually works out as it should, you actually get a targeting computer on top of it. This makes the C3 probably one of the deadliest Battlemasters out there, just because of how accurate it ends up being. A few different things came up over time to try to replace the Battlemaster, but in the end, nothing really stuck around. General Motor in 3070 launched the Warlord, which was actually meant to replace the Battlemaster. It was actually meant to make a Battlemaster that was simplified using more standard parts like the Vlar 300 engine, a standard 3-ton gyro, and a whole lot of other things. But design bloat being what it is, it ended up at 80 tons, preventing some of those advantages from being there. The Warlord uses a Pitband 320, a little bit smaller than what you have on the Battlemaster, a little bit cheaper. It has the same amount of armor on an Endo Steel skeleton, and the same kind of top speed, obviously, at 65 kilometers per hour. Like the Battlemaster, it tries to go with a heavy energy weapon suite of weapons, featuring a pair of Magna Hellfire Heavy PPC, one in each arm, in a 4-arm mount, closer to what you would see on a Thug instead. A set of 2 Martel ER medium lasers in each of the torsos, pointing forwards for a total of 6. You've got 16 double heat sinks to barely keep you cool once you start shooting, so I'm not a huge fan of those ER medium lasers. Go with standard medium lasers, you get the same punch on those inner sphere models. You get a little bit less range, but you'll be able to shoot more of them in quicker succession. Just an engineer tip here. Endo Steel is not the easiest thing to make because you need orbital foundries to actually do it. It gets difficult to build on a budget basis. During the Jihad, El Dorado, where the production line for the Warlord was cut up for Endo Steel's supply, but they had access to just about everything else to be able to make XL engines, double heat sinks, ferrofibrous armor, etc. With that bottleneck in production, they decided to make a 2G Warlord with an XL engine instead. That's a lot more risky because you might blow up because of it. But what happened was that they put 12 regular medium lasers in, 10 facing forward, 2 pointing backwards, and a tiny bit more armor. These, at this point in time, are actually more common than the original, even though that XL engine is more risky. The mech itself is actually easier to produce for GM on El Dorado. If we were anywhere else and Endo Steel access was easy to get, the 1G Warlord would be the most common one. It's an odd situation that was brought by the Jihad. And here I am betrayed by Comstar again, as my software is not rendering this slide properly. As final thoughts here, the Battlemaster is another workhorse battle mech, and one that you will recognize immediately from his distinctive shape, and that you will keep seeing on battlefields for years to come. Remember that 2 of the most influential politicians of the 31st century piloted Battlemasters in their glory days, and those were glorious Battlemasters indeed, just because of how efficient they were in an era where technology was not always available. As far as refits and designs go, we're going to keep seeing new Battlemasters come out. There's enough factories for them. But a little bit like the Thunderbolt before it, the technology on it is getting stretched thin. Outside of evolving the design towards clan technology, I don't think there's anything with the Battlemaster you can do that hasn't really already been done. So I thank you very much for listening to me for so long. I hope you have a very nice rest of your day, and I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.